He got on the wrong bus on a Wednesday morning in October and sat down in the third row and did not say a word to anyone about it for 41 minutes. Not because he was confused, not because he was embarrassed, because sometime in the first 3 minutes, between the first stop and the second, something happened on the number 33 Metro Local between Pico Boulevard and downtown Los Angeles that made him decide, without making a production of the decision, that he was exactly where he needed to be. He got off at the 7th Street Metro Center. He had been going to Koreatown. Before he stepped off, he paid everyone's fare, all 22 of them. He did it quietly, at the front of the bus, in conversation with a driver named Gloria Hendricks, who had been running the 33 route for 11 years, and who told this story for the first time to her sister on the phone that evening, and has been telling it, in various forms, to various people, ever since. She says the same thing every time at the end, that she has driven 11 years of routes and 10,000 mornings and seen most of what a city bus contains, which is most of what a city contains, and that in all of that time she has never seen a bus full of strangers become a room full of people quite as fast as it happened that Wednesday morning. She is not sure exactly what he did. She knows it started with a child. The Metro Local 33 runs from Santa Monica to downtown Los Angeles along Pico Boulevard, a route that is 32 years old and covers 11 miles in approximately 54 minutes, depending on traffic and the particular mood of the signals at Figueroa. It is not a glamorous line. It is a working line, the kind of route that carries people who are going to places they need to be, at hours when they need to be there, without particular concern for whether the getting there is pleasant. The buses on the 33 are the standard Metro fleet, blue and white, 40 feet long, room for about 40 seated passengers with standing available, a fare box at the front where you tap your tap card or feed your $1.75 into the slot and find a seat and get where you are going. The seats are hard plastic in a color that has never been officially described as comfortable and does not need to be. The windows have that particular quality of bus windows in morning light, which is to say that the city outside looks like a version of itself that is slightly more honest than the version you see from a car, closer to the pavement, slower, more legible. Gloria Hendricks had driven the 33 for 11 years on the morning run, which meant she left the yard at 5:40 a.m. and ran the route through the morning rush and into the mid-morning lull before handing off at noon. She was 53 years old, a grandmother of 2, a reader of library books in the 40 minutes between her lunch and her afternoon shift when she worked a double, and a person who had developed over 11 years of driving the same route through the same city, a particular quality that people who drive routes develop. She knew her regulars. Not just their faces, their rhythms. The man with the folded newspaper who got on at Pico and Crenshaw and never once looked up. The 3 women from the dry cleaning facility on Pico who always sat together in the back and spoke in the particular rapid shorthand of people who have worked side by side for a decade. The teenager with headphones so large they looked like earmuffs who got on at Pico and Hauser every Wednesday and Thursday and never at any other time, which had always struck Gloria as a detail that meant something she could not name. She had not seen the man in the gray jacket get on at the Pico and Cloverdale stop at 8:47. She had been watching the signal at the intersection ahead and had registered his tap card tap from the sound and the green light on the fare box without turning around. He had sat down in the third row on the right side, by the window. She would have described him, if she had seen him. Gray jacket, the worn kind, over a dark shirt. Dark jeans, the boots with the thick sole that she had noticed when he stepped off. She did not know who he was for the first 21 minutes. What she knew, beginning at approximately 8:51, was that something was happening in the third row. His name was not on the route. He was not going to Koreatown for anything that was scheduled. He had been leaving a meeting in West Hollywood, on foot, because the parking in that part of the city on a Wednesday morning was the kind of problem that is solved more easily on foot than in a car, and he had been walking east on Pico, with the vague intention of finding a rideshare, when the 33 had pulled to the stop ahead of him, and the door had opened. And he had made the decision, the kind of decision that is made in approximately 1 second, and does not feel like a decision at all, to get on. He had not checked the route number. He had not checked where it was going. He had simply gotten on, because the morning was good, and the bus was there, and he was not, that morning, in a hurry. He found the third row and sat down by the window and looked out at Pico Boulevard moving past, which is a thing you can only do from a bus, at a bus's pace, and which is a different experience than looking at Pico Boulevard from a car at the same speed. From a car, you watch the street. From a bus, you're part of it. He noticed the child at the stop at Pico and Crenshaw. She was 4 years old, or thereabouts. Small even for 4. She was sitting next to a woman, her grandmother it turned out, a woman named Dolores Ruiz, who was 67 years old and who was taking the 33 that morning because her car had been in the shop since Monday, and she had a doctor's appointment at 10:15 downtown, and the child had nowhere else to be. The child's name was Isabel. She had on rain boots that were printed with small green frogs, which was notable because it was not raining and had not rained in 11 days, and which suggested to anyone paying attention that the boots had been chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with the weather. Isabel got on the bus and immediately fixed her attention on the fare box, with the intensity of a person who has encountered something fascinating and is not going to pretend otherwise. Dolores fed the money in. 2 fares. She steered Isabel toward a seat. Isabel stopped at the third row. She looked at the man in the gray jacket. He looked at her. She said, "Those are old boots." He looked down at his boots. He said, "They are." She considered this. She said, "Mine have frogs." He said, "I can see that. How many?" She looked down at her boots with the gravity of someone doing a count that matters. She said, "A lot." He said, "That seems like the right number." Dolores said, to her, "Isabel, vamos, let the man sit." Isabel did not move immediately. She was still looking at the boots. She said, "Why are they old?" He said, "Because I've had them for a long time." "How long?" "Longer than you've been alive." She thought about this. It appeared to be a satisfying answer. She allowed her grandmother to steer her to the seats across the aisle, 1 row back, and she sat down and continued to look at the boots for the next several minutes, with the focused attention of someone filing information away for later use. What happened next did not happen all at once. It happened the way things happen on buses, gradually, sideways, in the particular manner of a space where people are in close enough proximity that the usual rules of public distance become slightly more permeable than they are on the street. He had spoken to Isabel. Isabel was visible to everyone in the forward section of the bus. The exchange had been brief and genuine and entirely without performance, the kind of exchange that adults and small children have when both parties are paying full attention and neither one is trying to be charming. It was simply a conversation. But it had a quality. The man with the folded newspaper, whose name was Arthur Dean, a retired postal supervisor from Inglewood, 68 years old, 22 years on the same route in a different capacity before he retired and started writing it as a passenger, lowered his paper a 1/4 inch. He looked at the man in the gray jacket. He looked at the boots. He went back to his paper. 2 stops later, at Pico and Hauser, the teenager with the large headphones got on. His name was Marcus Tran, 17 years old, a junior at a high school on Olympic Boulevard, who took the 33 on Wednesdays and Thursdays, because his orchestra rehearsal ended at 8:30, and the bus was faster than asking his mother to come back, and he found his usual seat in the 4th row and took his headphones off, because something in the forward section had a quality that made him want to hear what was happening. What was happening was a conversation between Dolores Ruiz and the man in the gray jacket, which had begun because Dolores had caught his eye and said thank you for being patient with her granddaughter, and he had said she was a remarkable kid, and Dolores had said she is 4, and he had said 4 is a remarkable age, and Dolores had said only if you're not the one keeping track of her. And he had laughed in the way people laugh when something is genuinely funny, and they are not performing the laugh for anyone. Isabel, from her position in the seat across the aisle, was listening to all of this with her frog boots planted flat on the floor. The 3 women from the dry cleaning facility, whose names were Carmen, Sylvia, and a woman everyone called Bet, who had been answering to Bet for 40 years, and whose given name appeared only on tax documents, were in the back and could not hear the conversation, but they could see Dolores laughing, which was something they had not seen before in the months they had been riding the same route, and it made them curious enough to lean forward slightly. Arthur Dean folded his newspaper. This was, by all accounts of the people who knew Arthur Dean, not a thing that happened on the morning bus. He said, to no one in particular, in the direction of the 3rd row, she's right about the boots, you know. They've seen some things. The man in the gray jacket looked at him. He said, they have. Arthur said, I used to have a pair like that. Wore them until the sole came off at the left heel. My wife told me to throw them away for 3 years before I did. What made you finally do it? Arthur thought about it. He said, she hid them. Something moved through the forward section of the bus, not laughter exactly, something adjacent to laughter. The particular warmth of a shared moment that does not require you to know someone to be part of it. Marcus Tran, in the 4th row, was watching this with the attention of someone who is 17 and has not yet learned to pretend he is not interested in things that interest him, which is one of the better qualities of being 17. The conversation that developed over the next 23 minutes was not a single conversation. It was several, overlapping, the way conversations overlap on a bus, when the usual membrane between passengers has thinned to the point where acknowledgement has become possible. Dolores told him about the doctor's appointment downtown and the car in the shop since Monday, and the fact that Isabel had insisted on the frog boots despite being told twice that it was not raining. He asked about the doctor, and she said it was nothing serious, a follow-up, and he said he was glad, and she said you and me both. Arthur Dean, who had served mail on a walking route in Inglewood for 22 years before a supervisor position had moved him indoors for the last 8, talked about the route itself, the way it had changed over the years, the businesses that had come and gone on Pico, the period in the 90s when this section of the boulevard had been very different from what it was now, and the ways in which it had and had not recovered. He said this without editorializing. He was describing the street the way someone describes something they have watched for a long time and have complex feelings about that they are not going to reduce to a simple statement. The man in the gray jacket listened to all of this. He asked questions, not conversational questions, the kind of question you ask to keep someone talking because you are being polite. Actual questions. The kind that suggest you heard the thing that was just said and want to know more about a specific part of it. He asked Arthur what years the walking route had covered. He asked Dolores whether Isabel's parents lived nearby. He asked about the car and what was wrong with it, and Dolores said she wasn't sure exactly. Something with the alternator, the man at the shop had explained it, but she had not understood the explanation. He said the alternator was usually a straightforward repair and not too expensive, which was the useful kind of thing to say when someone is worried about a car repair and you happen to know something about car repairs. Carmen, from the back, had migrated forward by 3 rows. She was not going to miss whatever this was. Sylvia and Bet followed, because they had been together long enough that when one of them moved, the other 2 came with her. Marcus Tran had taken his headphones completely off and was holding them in his lap. Gloria Hendricks, at the front of the bus, had been catching pieces of this in the mirror between stops and had the specific quality of attention of someone who is driving and listening simultaneously, which is a skill you develop on a route over 11 years. He had still not said his name. Nobody had asked. That was the remarkable thing, which Dolores mentioned afterward and Arthur mentioned afterward and Gloria mentioned to her sister that evening. Nobody asked. In 41 minutes of conversation between 7 or 8 people who had never met him, nobody asked who he was. They just talked to him. And he talked back. And the bus went down Pico and through downtown and toward the 7th Street Metro Center. And for 41 minutes it was not a bus at all, but a room. The particular kind of room that forms occasionally between strangers when all the usual reasons not to talk to each other have been temporarily suspended. Isabel fell asleep against Dolores's arm at around Hooper Avenue and did not wake up until the bus stopped downtown, with her frog boots still on and her face turned against her grandmother's sleeve. At the 7th Street Metro Center, the bus doors opened and people began to gather their things. He stood up. He said to Dolores that he hoped the doctor's appointment went well and that the car situation resolved itself quickly. He said to Arthur that it had been a pleasure. He said to Carmen and Sylvia and Bet that it had been good to share a bus with them, which was a sentence that could have sounded formal and instead sounded like what it was. He looked at Marcus Tran and said, with the directness of someone who has noticed something and decided to say it, "What do you play?" Marcus said, "Cello." He said, "Good instrument." Marcus said, "Yeah." He walked to the front of the bus. He spoke to Gloria Hendricks for about 90 seconds. The passengers who were close enough to hear said that he asked her how long she had been on the route, and she told him, and he asked if she liked it, and she said she did, and he said he could tell. Then he said he wanted to cover the fares for the passengers on the bus, and he said it the way someone says something when they have already decided and are not asking for feedback on the decision. He took out his wallet. He asked her how many people were on. She said 22. He covered all 22 fares. $38.50. He handed it to her in cash, which meant he had been carrying cash, which meant nothing in particular except that some people still carry cash, and he was one of them. She said, "You didn't have to do that." He said, "I know. I got on the wrong bus." She looked at him. She said, "Did you, though?" He looked at the bus, at Isabel asleep against Dolores's arm, at Arthur with his folded newspaper held loosely in one hand, at Marcus Tran standing in the aisle with his headphones around his neck. He said, "No, I don't think I did." He stepped off. The doors closed. Gloria Hendricks sat for a moment at the stop before pulling back into traffic. She looked in the mirror. Arthur Dean was looking out the window. Dolores was adjusting Isabel's position on her shoulder. Carmen and Sylvia and Bet were talking quietly in the way they always talked. But something in the register was different, softer, more attentive to each other than usual. She thought about what he had said. "I got on the wrong bus." She pulled into traffic and ran the route. Dolores Ruiz's doctor's appointment went well. The follow-up confirmed what her doctor had been hoping to confirm, which was that a course of treatment she had completed in the spring had done what it was supposed to do, and that the next appointment would be in 6 months rather than 3. She called her daughter from the waiting room to tell her, because her daughter had been worrying since the spring in the particular way of a daughter who does not want to add to her mother's worries by showing how worried she is. And Dolores could hear the sound of her relief through the phone, even though her daughter said only that was good news, Mom. And Dolores said, I know. Mija, I know. The car turned out to be the alternator, as he had guessed, and the repair cost $430, which was less than Dolores had feared, and more than she had, and her daughter made up the difference without being asked. Isabel wore the frog boots to the grocery store the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that. She still asks, occasionally, about the man with the old boots. Dolores tells her he was someone who got on their bus one morning and was very nice. Isabel says she knows that, and what she wants to know is whether his boots ever got new. Dolores says she doesn't know. Isabel says someone should probably tell him frogs are a good choice. Arthur Dean told his wife about the bus ride when he got home that afternoon. He told it fully and in order, from Isabel at the fare box to the 90 seconds at the front, and his wife listened all the way through without interrupting, which she said later was because she could tell from the way he was telling it that it was a story that did not need interruption. When he finished, she said, "Who was he?" Arthur said he found out later, after he got home and looked up the face that had been in the back of his mind since the 7th Street stop. He said the name. His wife said, "On? The 33? Arthur said, "3rd row. Window seat." She shook her head slowly, in the way you shake your head at something that is not unbelievable, but is surprising enough to warrant the gesture. Arthur said, "You know what the strange thing is? It didn't feel strange. That's the part I keep thinking about. It just felt like a bus." Marcus Tran told 2 people at orchestra rehearsal the following Thursday. He did not tell the story for effect. He told it because it was true, and because the 2 people he told, his stand partner, a girl named June, and his section leader, a senior named David who had been playing cello since he was 6, were people he talked to about things that were true. June said that was wild. David said he had heard that about him, that he was like that on public transit, that there were stories. Marcus said he had heard the stories too and had not entirely believed them. David said, "And now?" Marcus said, "Now I believe them." Gloria Hendricks told her sister that evening and told the story 3 more times over the following week, to her husband, to a colleague at the yard who had run the 33 before her, and who listened with the particular interest of someone who knows the route, and to a woman at her church who asked her one Sunday how work was going, and received, in answer, a longer response than she had been expecting. The thing she told every version of was the 90 seconds at the front of the bus, the $38.50, the question she had asked him, "Did you, though?" And his answer, which she said differently each time she told it, not because she was misremembering, but because each telling found a different part of the answer to rest on. She told her sister, "He said no. I don't think I did. And then he got off." She told her husband, he looked at all of them first. Before he answered, he looked at the whole bus, and then he said no. She told the woman at her church he didn't seem like he was in a hurry to get anywhere else, even at the end, even when he was stepping off. He just seemed like someone who goes where he ends up and doesn't argue with it. The sister asked what it meant. Gloria said she had been thinking about that. She said she thought it meant that the wrong bus and the right bus are sometimes the same bus, and that the difference is whether you notice what's on it. Her sister said, "That's a fortune cookie." Gloria said, "I know, but it's also true." There are 41 minutes in this story that I keep going back to. Not the fare. The fare was $38.50, and it was a generous thing, and it is the thing the title promises and the story delivers. But it is not the part I think about. I think about Arthur Dean folding his newspaper. He had been riding the 33 for 3 years since his retirement, on the same seat, on the same mornings, with the same paper. He had developed the folded newspaper into something close to armor, the signal that says, I am in a public space and I am not available to it. Most of us carry some version of this. The headphones. The phone, the particular arrangement of eyes that suggests we are looking at something in the middle distance that does not include whoever is sitting next to us. And then a man in a gray jacket said 4 words to a 4-year-old girl about her frog boots, and something in Arthur Dean shifted, and the paper came down, and he was there. Present. In the bus. Talking to a stranger. I think that is what 41 minutes can do. When someone in a room decides to be fully in it, it makes the other people in the room consider being fully in it too. Not because anything dramatic happened, not because anyone said anything profound. Because presence is contagious in a way that absence is not, and most of us are absent most of the time, and we have learned to call that normal. I do not know what I would have done on that bus. I would like to think I would have been Arthur, with the paper down. I suspect I would have been Marcus, with the headphones on, watching from the 4th row and not quite committing. Maybe that's where most of us are. The 4th row. Maybe the question is whether we take the headphones off. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves's well-documented and widely attested habit of being present, genuinely, fully present, with ordinary people in ordinary moments, without making a production of it. Drop a comment and tell me what stayed with you, the moment you keep going back to. Share this with someone who might need to hear it today. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. See you in the next one.